All right, hey everybody. This is Tim from Tim and Fran versus the Man. I'm Tim.
I'm Fran.
So we haven't seen you guys in a while. We've basically been I don't know. We've been busy with a lot of stuff. Also, we've just been lazy morons. So
Classic. Yeah, our generation is no
No
work ethic, I'll tell you.
Right.
Of course. But we're going to be talking mostly today about vaccines, mandates, passports, policy failures, and scientific developments that have been very recent.
Yeah. So since last time we saw you, we are still dealing with essentially the same problems that we were talking about all the way back in our earlier episodes. The COVID regime is still going strong. It seems like they're attempting to reinstate it. It seems like there may hypothetically be more pushback this time because a lot of people seem to be waking up, which is a good thing.
Right, and we've seen protests across Europe starting to develop in America, especially in New York City, as they've passed probably one of the more draconian vaccine passport mandates. And Australia has actually been dealing with pretty intense protests and near riots for the last couple of days. People actually engaging in street battles with the police over their lockdowns. And then tons of just very massive protests throughout France, Great Britain, of course, portions of Italy. And so a very robust anti-passport movement. Getting to the point even where in France they're actually taking the pictures of politicians that voted for their passport and putting them in public areas. And some people even calling it like a low-level civil war in France. And so yeah, lots to talk about though, lots of new data regarding vaccinated folks and how they can still spread coronavirus, especially the Delta variant. So yeah, I think we should just get right into it pretty much.
I think New Zealand also recently just locked down again.
Oh,
Their one case, whatever, because they had that big lockdown scheme initially, and then they were all celebrating because they hadn't had any COVID cases, and you had all those propaganda videos of them celebrating, even though they're aren't they a very remote island nation?
They are, and they honestly, if there was an actual pandemic, I would probably want to be in New Zealand or something like that. If you ever played Plague Inc. or the old Pandemic 2 game, Madagascar and Greenland were always the hardest to infect in those games, so certainly no different there. But I guess, I kind of want to pivot the conversation to, on the topic of a country like New Zealand, which is a very high vaccination rate. Delta variant and people who are vaccinated. You this claim a lot that this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated. However, if you know anything about evolutionary biology, you'll realize that a virus that's mutating to infect vaccinated people is actually being driven by vaccination campaigns to do so. It's not, it's not evolving these traits in unvaccinated people. And so this is definitely going to be a pandemic of the vaccinated and unvaccinated, pretty equally, it looks like.
Yeah, what I would say is that so I was looking up on the controlled platform the other day, Google, and what I kind of noticed is that the further back that you go within the information, and of course they're putting the older articles up first at the top of the search results on Google. And the reason why that is because the further you go back within the vaccination, so let's say you go back 4 months, they're saying, well, it really affects transmissibility. It really reduces transmissibility. And then the newer the information you're getting, so for example, this new study that's come out of Israel, it's kind of suggesting that it only actually reduces your likelihood to get infected by the high end is 64, but the low end is 39, and that seems to be the more accurate number right there. So this is kind of it seems that like as information is advancing on this thing, it appears that the likelihood for you to get the virus is getting higher, and also it doesn't seem to affect, if you're vaccinated, it doesn't really seem that you're any less likely to transmit it to someone else either.
Right. So yeah, initial narrative was you are doing this for other people, even if you're in your 20s. You know, you're in the age group where you're the most active. You're interacting with the largest amount of different age groups. You know, you're maybe traveling. So yeah, if you're getting vaccinated, you're doing it for other people and not yourself. And now it's obvious through various studies, which we'll probably source in the link here, that you are just as likely to transmit coronavirus as an unvaccinated person. The actual viral load in your nose and upper respiratory tract is the same. And you know the narrative now, it's just getting like they're hanging on to like a smaller and smaller sliver. Well, there's like, and now they're saying like, well, you know, you're less likely to end up in the ICU. However, you know, you look at a state like Massachusetts, heavily vaccinated, lots of double vax people, up to like 69% or so, like that.
Yeah, 69%.
And 30% of people in the ICU, not just in the hospital, but in the ICU, are also double vaccinated. And so, you know, very clearly, perhaps the second part of the narrative now that they've, you know, clearly it doesn't really reduce transmissibility. It's 39% effective according to Israeli studies, which, you know, up to 80% of the population is vaccinated. Perhaps now it's not even very good at preventing severe illness. And again, this is the result of having it be a non-sterilizing vaccine that doesn't actually prevent the virus from replicating within your body, simply preventing, I guess, like the highest amount of replication, perhaps. But, you know, this virus seems to be very adept at mutating. It seems to be very, you know, it seems to have an intimate relationship and knowledge of the human immune system. And so this is just sort of really starting to be talked about in more mainstream sources. You know, you can only keep a narrative going for so long with these types of results, but still they're fucking trying, you know, excuse my language, but...
Well, what I find really interesting is they're not even like controlling, they're not even like walking back. As new information is coming out, they're not even attempting to walk back from the concept that it's about protecting others. So what you find that's so fascinating to me is that it is almost, you have almost the same rate at which you can, as a vaccinated person, you can transmit it to someone else, and you only have around like a 39% protection rate. I mean, with a virus that's this transmissible, 39% is nothing. That's what, like, that, like, what, 40, basically like 40, like 40%, like two, that's like three, you're reducing your rate by like 2/5, basically. That's crazy. Like, so basically, if you get vaccinated, you're not really protecting anybody else. Even if you had like 100% vaccination rates, it would still mutate past the vaccine, which is also kind of what you seem to already be finding with the Delta variant. And possibly the next iteration of COVID will, the vaccine will be even more useless. And what I really find fascinating about this is that they still keep on saying that, oh, get the vaccine because you need to protect other people. And the only people who could possibly believe that have had their critical thinking, like, abilities, like, so stifled by a year and a half of propaganda that they literally cannot, like, they don't know how to formulate like basic thoughts anymore. Like, these people are like brain dead at this point. It's actually, it's kind of scary almost.
I mean, these are the same people, and there's a few points I want to address first, but I guess this is the most pressing thing. These are the same people in January of 2020 when I was going off about the virus, how it looks like it's going to probably potentially be the next 1918 type style pandemic. They're telling me it's just the flu. You're talking about this right now because Trump's being impeached and you want to like distract from that. First of all, not a Trump supporter. Second of all, you know, I was looking at pretty obscure websites regarding, the emerging nature of the virus and how infectious it was and whatnot. And so it just seems like, our society has always been like, probably a few months behind this thing. And so you have a variant now that's very adept at going right past the vaccine quote unquote protection screen. The vaccine at this point is pretty much just like a serum. It's only good to prevent like the most severe illness. But even then though, Israel being 80% vaccinated, they're actually seeing the highest number of hospitalizations during the entire pandemic, the highest number of deaths as well. And so you can even suggest that perhaps in some people, the vaccine not being quite perfect is leading to a greater immune response as your body tries to make antibodies. And another critique of the vaccine that I've seen is that it doesn't really have a cutoff switch as to when to stop making antibodies. And so your body is just kind of having this immune response, which in a lot of young and middle-aged people is causing myocarditis, which is the swelling of the heart, the surrounding, muscles and whatnot. And so, we've had a lot of reports of unfortunate deaths, pretty severe side effects. And there's some people that still try to justify it. It's like, oh man, I had myocarditis, I nearly died, but hey, I'm happy to get the vaccine, man. I did my part. And it's like, no, you didn't do jack shit. It was a personal medical choice. You've not reduced your chance of spreading it. You've not even really reduced your chance of severe illness in the grand scheme of things, And so, again, this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated and the vax. Everyone, can get it. And at this point, like I don't know. I started off this whole thing from a very like scientific, so it's my background in science, very scientific and sort of concerned lens. But at this point, like seeing all the secondary effects, not just like in the general society, but like in my friend group, seeing people, I guess, reverting back to like their high school baby selves and retreating back to like their comfort zones and things like that. I'm very disgusted by these, these consequences that no one really thought about when we were going into lockdown. And I think you were showing me earlier a paper from the United Kingdom where there was pretty much like a bunch of doctors were addressing like the Prime Minister and basically pleading with him to reverse a lot of the policies.
Yeah, and
I don't know if you can elaborate a bit more on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what they were kind of finding, or what they were arguing in that paper, was that a lot of the problems associated with the lockdowns and whatever, the psychological impacts were often much greater, especially within like children. And I think that you brought up these negative psychological impacts in people in our age range as well.
Yeah.
They like, as you were talking about earlier, like I've definitely like noticed that it seemed, and it's almost like they're like certain like subtle things, but like it does seem like people are like kind of regressing into worse versions of themselves because there's no challenge. And that's especially like, I remember there was this video with Jonathan Haidt, and he was basically explaining why does everyone in this sort of like the younger millennials, older Gen Zer generation, like this kind of block of people, why do they have so many anxiety disorders? Why are they like afraid to like make phone calls and all this just like weird stuff of like people who like cannot interact with other people or face any kind of criticism? And Jonathan Haidt postulated one of the reasons was like, the whole always on your damn phone kind of meme.
Yeah.
One of that. So probably we should probably use our phones less.
Well, the thing is, your phone. Sorry.
Yeah.
It induces like a crack response in your brain. It's the same neural pathway. You got the dopamine. But anyway, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent. You seem like you're getting to a good point.
Yeah. So, try to just like limit that phone use. I remember one time I like went without my phone for like 3 days. I noticed my concentration was like infinitely better. But the point that relates to this a lot more than that was the other thing was that the sort of over parenting kind of crisis came out in like the 90s. So all these parents, they were obsessed with stranger danger. They're obsessed with, their kids weren't allowed to have any sort of like non-structured time to just go out and play. You had to send them to after school activities. They couldn't be like have moments to themselves to just play outside, to be unmanaged, because that's too dangerous. So what you kind of like found was that this we moved to the city recently. Anyway, so people are shouting outside. I don't know if you can hear it.
So it's a great time, apparently.
But anyway, so these what they're kind of postulating is that this like kind of like having a childhood where you take these kind of risks and you go out and play with the other school kids and you get like roughed up, maybe even get like roughed up occasionally or something like that. Like these kinds of facing challenges and like facing your anxieties as like a kid, these are crucial to like your development as like a person, so that you can actually like deal with challenges later in adult life. And this is kind of why you have these, this is why you have like these people in their like mid-20s who like can't make a phone call and they're like, oh, I'm nervous, I don't want to call the pizza guy, and like just like weird shit like weird shit like that.
Oh man, I don't even know if I want to go into this anecdote, but I know someone who, actually I'm not even going to get into it, but basically they have a very personal medical problem. Something that should be happening naturally hasn't happened to them in over a year, and they are afraid to call their doctor to see what might be going on. Think of a monthly natural process that's supposed to happen.
I feel like you gotta say what it is now.
I don't want to, obviously I'm not going to say their name, but like they haven't had their period in over a year.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, I'm afraid to like call the doctor, and I'm like, dude, that's mission critical. Like that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of, well, we can't really segue into that yet because I have to go back to this other point.
Go ahead.
Of how, but speaking of periods, apparently there is some evidence that people have had the vaccine and now their period schedule is kind of fucked. More on that later. Anyway, so anyways, the point of me bringing up the Jonathan Haidt, that Jonathan Haidt, I guess you could call it a speech, a presentation. The Jonathan Haidt presentation was that I think that if you have an entire generation of people who can't even face very basic challenges and like the whole triggered thing and all this stuff, how much worse is it going to be if you train children from like a very young age to be mortified by people who do not have a face covering?
Right.
That going to a restaurant will possibly kill them, which is also wrong, by the way, because kids are so unlikely to die from this virus that it's almost not even worth considering as an option.
Right.
That's like, oh, I'm so terrified. My kid shouldn't go outside because they might get hit by lightning. That's how insane that is.
And I mean, like, really the only thing that the data shows in terms of children, like the Delta variant, is that, in some cases they had, like, gastrointestinal issues, and there was some shortness of breath things. And so I guess for a lot of parents in America, if the kid's short of breath, they're going to, like, freak the fuck out and have them go to the ICU. But an interesting note about ICU data in children is that, there was various statements made by the CDC that, the Delta variant's hitting children in Texas and Florida particularly hard. These states being these crazy southern states that just are stupid and they don't follow what the North is doing. But anyway, they found that the reason why there were so many kids in the ICU was because these ICUs were some of the only places where you could actually have proper containment protocols for COVID-19, and you could actually keep people in a setting where they would be able to, are less likely to transmit infection. Not necessarily that they had severe disease and needed to be on, needed to be intubated, anything like that. So, a lot of misleading data out there. It's totally an information war, and that's honestly, if you want to be someone who, I gotta keep myself in frame here, I keep like rising above the camera. Anyway, if you were genuinely interested in crisis management, you'd want like the best information coming at all times. You wouldn't want like, oh well, like that data it looks like this, but it's actually this. So because this is how you breed skepticism about this damn thing. This is how you breed like conspiracy theories. But honestly, like
the conspiracy theorists have honestly been right about almost everything.
Pretty much everything, dude. And it's just really funny to see. The lab leak origin, for example, that was like taboo to talk about. You'd be deplatformed, you'd be demonetized, you'd be ostracized. In some cases, heavily censored. Some cases, arrested. If you suggested that a virus that somehow has this intimate relationship with the human immune system escaped from nature. The last coronavirus that broke out was in 2012. It was amongst a group of miners. And one of like the central Chinese provinces was bat coronavirus. It killed like 6 out of the 12 people. And so when these things come out of nature, generally they're not adept at working with the host's body to the point where they survive most of the time. Generally, they kind of just kill you. It's like a 10 to 50% death rate with a lot of these like wild type as Fauci would say coronaviruses.
Right.
This one, as soon as it started, it was, producing asymptomatic cases. And so, I went on a bit of a rant there, but like...
Vaccine passports were considered a conspiracy theory as well at first. I remember people making fun of... I remember a bunch of like my liberal friends, like one of them was trying to argue that if we needed to be vaccinated to go into a store, they would have already done it by now. And it was like a few months in or whatever.
Right.
And that's not...
And that's like...
They just don't really understand how like propaganda works, because you have... It's like the whole boiling... You have to like... Or like boiling a frog metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Like... You have to do it slowly, because if they ever get a sense of real heat, they will jump out.
Yeah. You have to slowly shift that Overton window. It can't be an overnight thing.
Right. I mean, I started with 2 weeks to slow the spread, and here we are, a year and a half later, and yeah, technically they ended the lockdowns a couple months, at least in the United States, not anywhere else.
Right.
But... The problem is they're all kind of talking about, well, maybe we should bring it back because of the Delta variant, which is fucking stupid.
Right. And there's a lot of data that actually suggests that, if the Delta variant hasn't peaked in the U.S., it's actually quite close to peaking. And so, you saw this very similar pattern in India where you had a very quick, pretty impressive uptake in the virus, and then it kind of, the rates of infection plummeted, and they're sort of back to normal. And so, really got to watch out for, people using this Delta variant as a means to justify or attempt to justify lockdowns, because it looks like, based on a lot of data, a lot of curves to different states, in terms of infection curves, it looks like it's starting to slow or plateau, sort of as we speak. So maybe those vaccines are working. No.
I mean, the thing is, even if the Delta variant wasn't slowing down, the problem I think that with a lot of these arguments is that, well, we have to wait until like the cases come down to unlock down the entire country. But the problem is that what you're finding is the vaccines are not actually effective at reducing the spread at all.
Right.
So it actually doesn't matter. In fact, our only real chance to like get this virus under control or whatever would technically be herd immunity at this point. In fact, there's It's pretty amusing. This this dude I watch on BitChute, Sticks Hex and Hammer, he's pretty funny. He is saying that we should actually be having like COVID parties and like COVID orgies and stuff, which I honestly agree with him, because the only possible way to get rid of the virus for good is to reach some kind of herd immunity before it can mutate. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to infect everyone as quickly as possible. Whereas right now what we're doing is by like slowing the spread and attempting to like vaccinate it so that it can mutate past the vaccine and create like new variants. I mean, ideally what you kind of want to do is get a very fast variant that's very non-lethal, so like very quick transmissibility, non-lethal, that just burns through the population very quickly. But what we're kind of doing is the exact opposite of that strategy, and it's honestly like, it kind of just reminds me of like, it's like a very old theme, but it's like the hubris of man attempting to control nature.
Right. And of course, as well, this virus was born in a lockdown environment. You know, you recall the Wuhan lockdown. That was one of the most brutal in the world. They were literally welding people into their apartments so as to like slow the spread of quote unquote. And yet, the virus mutated during that lockdown in those initial conditions, adjusted to them, and is now very, very, very adept at spreading in even some of the most intense lockdowns as we're seeing in, Australia right now, the coronavirus. You know, we have had 2 cases in New South Wales today, and so we're going to basically shut down your life as you know it. You know, fucking idiots, honestly. Like, it just frustrates me so much. But I don't want to say that it's the people of Australia, it's the politicians, because the people have actually shown like a really, I guess, strong will to stand up to this authoritarianism.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the person in Australia. I think
Sure.
that there's definitely like the smart people in Australia, or at least the more disagreeable and rugged, I guess you could say, people who are like rising up, and then there's kind of like the sheep people, probably the same people who wanted them to get rid of guns in the 90s, which didn't do anything, by the way.
Yeah.
They keep on dragging out that, oh, well, it reduced the amount of murder, even though the murder rate was like dropping at the same rate before they took away everyone's guns.
Right.
So I guess all those people who wanted to defend guns back then are coming out again now.
I mean, dude, imagine trying to arrest someone who's literally, people have been cited and arrested for just simply going outside to get some fresh air, get some sunlight, maybe smoke a cigarette. You know, just imagine that, people attempting to do that with an armed citizenry. Like, I'm not necessarily advocating armed insurrection in Australia, although, geez, I get a couple of drinks in me, maybe then, no. But it's an incredible, just brutal, naked authoritarianism, and it should be a precautionary tale for the rest of the world. And I'm actually super happy to see, people rising up, especially in the United States. Interestingly enough, a lot of the minority communities, we see this happening a lot in New York City. A lot of BLM protesters are teaming up with the quote-unquote anti-vax, I guess, like vaccine skeptics. I want to find like a better way to phrase them where I'm not using like the other side's narrative. But anyway, there's a lot of the based people.
Just people are fucking based.
But there's a lot of footage I've seen in New York City, BLM, and outright Trump supporters, for example, just genuinely linking up arm in arm and saying, no, these vaccine passports are ridiculous.
No, that's really cool. I actually hadn't heard about that.
There's a path to unity, I think, as well. But I think, obviously Black people, like, they've been experiments in all kinds of different ways under this shitty, centrally planned state that we've had for the last 100 years or so. Economically, literally biologically, with some of the Tuskegee experiments, where they were like intentionally infected with various STDs and whatnot. Just horrible things. And so, their level of skepticism as a community is very much understandable. And I appreciate, sort of the energy they're bringing to this movement, especially in New York City with, the lowest rate of vaccinations occurring amongst people of color, which is, again, unsurprising. they're a group of people that are very skeptical of authority, especially, considering the treatment by the government over the last 100 or so years.
No, I would say like they've kind of been fucked over by the government just throughout our entire history. I think actually,
Right.
But yeah, yeah, and still.
Yeah.
So I would say that yeah, the what I find really interesting is that you have all of these quote unquote well-meaning progressives and liberals who are totally for vaccine passports, yet they scream about voter ID laws and call those racist. This is the most I honestly don't understand how much cognitive dissonance you must have to hold these two concepts in your head. Voter ID laws, these are racist and bad because black people cannot get an ID. And that's essentially the argument, or it's harder for them to get it because of socioeconomic factors or something. And then on the other hand, they're saying that black people who have been fucked over hundreds of times by the federal government, by state government, by basically all the governments, probably everywhere. I mean, the government's fucking everybody everywhere, but especially them. These people are incredibly skeptical of that because they have been experimented on. So they don't want to take the vaccine. It's, culturally they're just not really interested. So around only 30% of the black community, and I think the Latin community has very low rates of vaccination as well.
This is in New York City? Or is this
I think that this is kind of everywhere.
Okay.
And they're totally fine with having a vaccine passport that is going to disproportionately affect 70% of the black community. Because the voter ID thing, that's going to affect 4% or something? I don't know the exact figure, but 70% versus this again percent of black people just can't afford to buy an ID from the government.
Sure. And again, what data are they looking at to see that oh yes, of course, purchasing an ID for $60 to $100 is just such a large problem for this group of people. I don't know. It just seems like they're making a bunch of brash assumptions, and that's just honestly horribly racist. I don't want to get caught up on the race stuff, but it's just interesting to see the hypocrisy of this. You have a group of people definitely righteously skeptical of the intentions of the current government, or pretty much any government that's existed in the last 100 or plus years. And yeah, their rights are being curtailed because, if you don't buy into a subsidized product from a corporation, you can't enjoy fundamental freedoms and fundamental parts to being a human being. A lot of people oh, it's not important to go to a bar, dude, or getting a haircut, or just any number of things. Oh, it's not important to better yourself at the gym. No, these things fucking matter, dude. Being able to go out, socialize, game up with people, network at a bar. These are all critical things. A lot of really critical ideas in the American Revolution were literally hashed out in a tavern. Probably the founding fathers drunk off their asses. Yeah, dude, I think we should go with this new, classical liberal ideology of government. I could see the founders getting plastered.
Yeah, it was just
going on.
John Locke.
Fucking Hamilton's a fucking square, dude. He's not even as drunk as us, So
yeah, Hamilton was probably the group bitch, and they always made fun of him.
He only drank Seagrams, ye olde Seagrams, and was oh, I think we should still have a central government, but Jefferson, meanwhile, is just...
Are the bankers really that bad? I don't know.
Jefferson's basically blacking out. He's this fucking thing, dude, I all fails, man. Fuck the state, basically. But anyway, you are restricting a very large population's rights. A population that is, been pretty active and mobilized for the past year, for various racial I think a lot of it's controlled op, and but this seems genuine, like organic. And of course, no one in the mainstream is gonna fucking talk about this. That would literally like flip the entire worldview upside down.
Oh yeah.
You know, but even again, as we keep saying, like the vaccination literally makes no difference in a lot of cases, and in fact, in some cases, may actually make the illness worse. Not because, or simply because your immune system is now like on overdrive. So when it sees the pathogen in a slightly different variation, it's gonna fucking freak out.
Yeah, I think that if I remember correctly, there have been studies on previous vaccines for coronavirus strains and like certain influenza viruses. And what the doctors were talking about was that the vaccines could, like, if you got another variant of that, of like any form of coronavirus, and because COVID-19 isn't the first coronavirus anyway, so just in case you guys didn't know that. So this is like back in like 2019, this doctor was talking about how if you got like infected with another variant of said coronavirus that they were talking about at that time, that in the study, and I think they were doing it on animals, that it could actually create like a heightened immune response. So I'm really interested to see if that pans out in this vaccine, because they were talking about this problem in 2019, and they gave them about a year to work out that pretty massive bug that they couldn't figure out in the previous 60 years that they were working on this technology.
Right.
So and then they expect me to believe that they worked out that bug in under a year, or like a little over. Yeah, honestly, a little, like about a year.
Yeah.
That they worked out that entire bug. I don't think so. I mean, hey, maybe, but I don't think so.
Again, like if you talked about a coronavirus, like broad screen vaccine, mRNA based, to various physicians, doctors in like 2018, they would have laughed at you. They would be like, well, the intention's there, but the technology just simply isn't. And then, suddenly they just got their shit together as if some kind of like Hollywood-esque, like, the movie Contagion, where they had a vaccine within like 7 months for a totally like new virus. I don't know. Again, coronaviruses aren't anything new, but as they saw with some of the RSV viruses, the actual like parts of the acronym always escape me. I think it's like, I don't want to butcher it, but anyways, they found that as well in the 70s when they tried to make vaccines against various RSV viruses, that the side effects were just very severe, producing autoimmune responses and things like that. And so similar dynamics going on with coronaviruses. But you mentioned effects to like people's periods and like menstrual cycles.
Yeah,
as well.
And interestingly enough, this is probably another issue that's going to divide the left-wing movement, because there are going to be women who are complaining about their periods being their period cycle being like radically changed, and having like very unusual period cycles. So apparently in the UK, there are at least 30,304 reports currently of women reporting that their period cycle has just been completely out of whack. And so you have to think that not only is that strange, but like the number could very well be a lot higher, because that's like a weird thing to want to report.
Right.
Like that's it can be like a touchy subject for some people, and especially in the UK, the propaganda is even more heavy than in the United States to like get the jab. So any kind of like thing that could potentially show skepticism, like, oh, well, is this affecting my fertility rate, is going to be looked down like very heavily there. And so if your period is shifting or just non-existent from after you get the vaccine, then this what exactly would the vaccine be doing to like other aspects of like your reproductive system or potential, like honestly, like what is that vaccine like doing to a lot of other things,
A lot of
you
those
know, like
systems,
yeah, a lot of other systems, and it's just like it's very
really.
I don't know, it's definitely unsettling because like it's just a very like that's a weird side effect. And the thing is like this is kind of like the conspiracy theorists are like, oh man, the globalists, and the they're trying to wipe us out, and the population control,
Oh, right.
and all that stuff. But the thing is, this piece of information almost goes into that concept.
Or you kind of understand.
Potentially.
You kind of understand where their skepticism lies. But I think honestly, like a really important thing to remember during this is that there's going to be a lot of like controlled opposition bullshit.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of people out there that's like, the coronavirus isn't real, and like I don't know, I said that in a British accent, but like.
Like because of David Icke, yeah.
You'd be like, actually, the coronavirus is the result of your, exposure to interdimensional lizards or some shit. Like, there's going to be a lot of shit out there that you have to just really disregard because you're gonna have a bunch of you're gonna have a million strong army of like soy Wojak, Reddit science Marvel boys and girls. You're like, well, I can actually read the medical science and I can like,
which they haven't.
Right, they haven't. They've simply just reposted what their other like woke friends have posted, or I don't know. I mean, some of the stuff is insane. They have like rudimentary knowledge about the scientific method, and then they see the mainstream source. Anyway, I don't want to go down that route. What I'd like to say is that this issue requires a fuck ton of nuance, a fuck ton of like peeling back various layers and looking between the lines. And so I think I encourage a lot of people to avoid these like actual conspiracies, right? Do I think that they're trying to reduce global population through this? No. Do I think they want to like psychologically get people to not reproduce as much? Of course.
I think potentially they could.
I mean,
be
maybe,
doing that.
But it's like I just want to caution people from getting caught up in like I don't know, like COVID's never actually been isolated in the lab, and like it's not real. And
oh yeah, no, I agree. Like the thing is that you want to make certain that if you're going to make a radical claim, you want to have a good amount of evidence to back it up. Because the thing is that if you overstate your claims, and Ryan Dawson talks about this a lot, another really cool dude you should look up. Ryan Dawson talks about this a lot, and he talks about how the problem with like the QAnon community and like these types of people is that they're vaguely on the correct side of all this stuff. They have an extreme skepticism for the authorities. I mean, unless they're Trump, but
right.
They have a great skepticism for the deep state and the globalists and all these sorts of people, but they overstate their claims, and they go into very hyperbolic areas that are not verifiable, like they're like child molestation, like camps on Mars, and like just like very wild shit that you really have to make certain that you can get some solid evidence before you say anything like that. I want like 7. First of all, if it's something that crazy, I want at least 70 studies, eyewitnesses up the yin yang. Do not start saying that shit, okay? I'll find you. Well, not really, but like, don't do it.
Maybe he will. Maybe the deep state global network of I don't know. I don't fucking know where I'm going with that, but
The Jewish lizards.
Of course, yes. Well, no, that's what pissed me off about Alex Jones for the longest fucking time. He's calming down now, but he would make amazing points about central banking, technocrats, sort of the rising corporate techno state, and then be like, well, these are the agents of Satan and like the demons and their Jewish lizards, and it's like, dude, shut the fuck up. Yeah, you gotta only go with like 25% of what you're saying. Like that's right, but like you start trying to attribute it to like supernatural shit, like
Right, and then this isn't necessarily like us saying you can't like speculate about that kind of stuff. However, only when you're in an argument with somebody, only talk about what you have a decent amount of evidence to that you can reasonably say, like, this has a very high potential of being true.
Right.
And you can show people the information, the proof on that, because the problem is once you start making these fucking crazy claims, they're going to dismiss everything that you have to say. And the thing is, there are people who are social engineers out there attempting to control us. That is true. However, like, there are like bad people, there are real conspiracies that go on, but are they lizards? Probably not.
Right.
So you want to keep that to a minimum.
They did this with the Epstein and Podesta and all the related pedophiles in government. They at first threw out these insane, wild, like, I'm not
raping kids in like the underground pizza shop and stuff.
Yeah. But like, actually, if you look at like what's on the records, what's in like various public court documents, if you can access them, like that shit's wild enough.
Yeah.
How, like, why are half of our like celebrity class and political class, like, why are half of their names in like the Lolita Express's like guest list, throughout the last 20 or so years? Like, that's a good enough place to start and be like, look, we know like child trafficking occurred on this plane. We know that this was going to an island where there was known trafficking. That should be fucking well enough. But what happens is I think they shift like the outer bounds of the Overton window to such an extreme place that you're able to accept like more shit that's like less than that extreme. It's like, oh, phew, like they're not drinking children's blood. Okay, so it's probably like okay then. You can't let them get away with this shit because they're using your passion, they're using your like conviction, because a lot of us in this movement have a lot of conviction. We have guiding moral principles, and so we're not surprised if these are almost like demonic like figures or whatever. Like, these are demons, these are horrible people, but they're not actually demons. They don't actually, they're in our dimension. Right. They're right here. They're flesh and blood, just like you and I.
Right. They're just like sociopathic and very fucked up. As I remember, what were you just saying? You were talking about the
pedophile ring.
Pedophile ring. Damn it! I'm like trying to remember
how they stretched the truth of that, or like they implanted these like.
Oh yes, yeah. There we go. So so what I noticed is that once all the QAnon stuff was happening and the claims were getting more and more ridiculous over the Epstein thing, the articles started coming out saying, like, essentially concentrating a lot more on the Q people than the actual ring itself, and saying, like, well, the Q people, their claims are so ridiculous. And I could very easily see what the mainstream media was trying to do. They were trying to distract people from the fact that there was like this pedophile ring that clearly had very wealthy, rich connections and like political connections and like people in the entertainment elite kind of connections. But then they would like divert the entire conversation to the crazy shit that the Q people were saying, like the fact that they drank children's blood and all that kind of stuff. And the problem is you'd have like these liberals who are complaining about the Epstein and the rings, and then they'd be sharing these stupid fucking articles, and then I'd try to point out to them what they were doing, and then they'd be like, well, in paragraph 5 of the article, they say the ring is real, so that's not what they're trying to do. It's like, no, the problem is they're diverting your attention to somewhere that's not important. But the problem is you guys like following for the other side of the controlled ops, so like you're basically becoming like the Antifa, like useful idiots, except for the other side, to as like a sort of like divide and conquer thing, but also to like discredit because the current anti-establishment is the right wing, for the most part, because the authoritarianism is mainly coming from the left wing. But they are attempting to use you guys as essentially controlled opposition in the sense that you discredit, through over-exaggerated claims, other like conspiracy theorists who actually have a lot of evidence to back up what they're saying. You're discrediting them, and that's basically what they've been doing this entire time with COVID as well. The when you guys are talking about like they are microchipping us with like the vaccines, when you're talking about like the 5G towers caused COVID-19, and just like stuff like that. Like, unless you have like a lot of evidence to say that, like, I know that Bill Gates is working on technology like that. Like, I understand that there's like a basis of like a point like to what you're saying. But the thing is, like, you have to, like, stick to what you know.
Right.
You can, like, prove the fact that Bill Gates on an interview was talking favorably about the Aadhaar system, and they're trying to put biometric IDs in the poor people in India so they can access, like, welfare services, basically using them as a guinea pig population. You can use that because they have admitted it on video, but don't go past where you can prove, because then people are like, oh, fuck that, that's crazy.
And I'll even go one step further. You don't really need, like, if you know just the evilness of even a concept of a state, right? You have a parasitic class of people who think that they deserve your wealth because they have your best interest in mind, and somehow they have a higher claim on your life. Like, that's a great stop right there. That's amazing. You kind of want it, like, right there. I don't know. It just seems like people are trying to like, oh yeah, but did you know that they're this evil? Or like, oh, they're actually far worse than you could ever imagine. It's like, I get that, I understand that, but like,
yeah.
Again, going with what you know is a massively good strategy in all of this information war. And I highly recommend it, as Tim has been saying here. And so yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate that. But also, not being afraid to occasionally. I don't know, just do your own homework as well, and reading between the lines on a lot of these various news articles. There's one now that it's like the vaccinated are scared and scientists don't quite have the answer, and it's like, well, if you look at the history of immunity, attempting to create immunity against various respiratory viruses, this isn't really a surprise that the COVID vaccine actually isn't working out all that well. This has been sort of a history of attempting to inoculate people against respiratory viruses. It tends to not work very well, especially when, like COVID, the respiratory virus has multiple different animal hosts. And so now COVID, has been found in a variety of species of animals, and so it can kind of mutate freely as much as it'd like to. But again, you notice how I'm presenting this, and I don't want to like put my worldview on anyone else, but you got to be reasonable, you got to be nuanced, right? You can't say something like, oh, well, COVID isn't real, it's all fake, the deaths are fake, it's not even a thing anymore. You kind of have to like recognize that like it is like a threat. In some cases it does
not
produce...
a particularly big one.
Right. But it has the capacity to, in some individuals, if you're really unhealthy, overweight, smoke, diabetic, etc., it has the capacity for systemic infection, which could fuck your day up. That's not like... But to go further and then say, oh, well, we need to lock down, we need to shut down the economy, we need to like rewrite an entire like generation's like social, I guess, patterns, that's fucked. You don't need to do that for pretty much anything, like at all, ever. And so again, as I said, like nuance is super important. It's not sexy, right? It's a lot sexier to be like, oh, well, Bill Gates is like going around and he's blasting these signals to create this virus in people's cells, and oh man, it's all about your mindset. Which partially I think mindset is a huge part, part of people's lives. But I have friends who are like, well, this virus is only infecting people because they're like, they have the mindset that they're gonna get sick, and it's like, I get where you're coming from, but nuance, people. Even if it isn't like the sexiest thing, we need to be like the group with the most logic, as we've always been as like libertarians and anarchists and whatever. We have always had the most logical a lens for pretty much any crisis that's happened, and when we've been known for our nuance, which drives the elites and media moguls and things like that fucking nuts. It drives them nuts to see someone who's anti-establishment come back with their same arguments, but in a more nuanced, less frenzied, less yellow journalist sort of way. And so, I don't know. I would just encourage that as a continued tactic as well. Not totally dismissing things, not falling for like the sexier, like, oh, well, this is just a fake thing. It's not even real. The phrase pandemic, which I understand where you're coming from, there's a lot of central planners involved. There's a lot of sketchy shit that they're advancing with these lockdowns and various policy changes. But I think at the end of the day, the virus is real. And, in some ways, or in some instances, can really fuck your day up. And so, just kind of use your better judgment. I'm sure there's a lot of preppers and people who are kind of, they're always like yellow alert awareness of different things. Bring that same energy into this thing. You don't need to freak out, but be prepared. But mostly you're going to be okay. It's not...
Be a strong logician, but be a passionate logician.
Mm-hmm.
And state your case strongly. Do not give an inch in the sense of, in terms of lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, say, no, fuck you. Absolutely. But yeah, definitely.
The NFU or something, I don't know. It's a very simple formula for success in this manufacturing crisis.
Right, and I think that it's definitely important to keep your case against vaccine mandates within what you know, so that you can hopefully deprogram your libtard friends.
The libtards.
You might not be able to get to them, but get actual sources, actual documents, actual information that will contradict. We're gonna have a few in the show notes at the bottom. Some articles that you can link to that kind of shows the vaccines are not they're not really what they're claiming, which is a protection of others. It is mostly just a protection for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think in the long run it won't even be that. It actually might be worse for people. That's just a running theory, though. That's largely speculative, but that's kind of like what I think is going to happen, just based on past coronaviruses and how they've interacted with vaccines, or at least vaccines they've attempted to make for them, which is why we didn't have one until the last few months or so.
Yeah, there's been some pretty severe autoimmune responses from past vaccines that were rushed. The first swine flu vaccine in the 70s. I know people who have various allergies now and days where their immune system flares up and actually starts attacking their own body, resulting from these the one-time jab that they got back in the day. So these calls now for booster shots, these calls for compulsory vaccination, it's just a recipe for danger. And some of the people who actually are in control of vaccine safety at MIT, people who look into this stuff for a living, they're warning against compulsory vaccination. And it's just to put people's livelihoods on the line for something that's pretty much experimental technology still is just absurd to me. Because you're not supporting this corporation that your tax dollars paid for these quote unquote free vaccines.
Well, I mean, but that, unfortunately, that's probably why this is happening, is partially because of the pharmaceutical companies and the government have gotten into bed with each other.
You want to talk about fascism, there's a strong anti-fascist movement out there. This is it. This is the big one. This is that's what as fascist as it gets. I mean, I don't know. Just imagine not being able to work unless you got a government phone or I don't know. I'm trying to think of things that would piss Antifa off. And I think both Proud Boys and Antifa are controlled op movements. It's kind of topical because they're getting more rowdy again. But it's simply absurd to mandate something that, was created from like a private facility. And again, as more and more data is suggesting, is really more of like a personal protection thing at this point, to prevent like the most severe of illness. But again, even that last little thing they're trying to stand on is kind of crumbling underneath them as more data comes in.
Yeah, because it's looking like not only, well, I mean, there are a couple of running like theories, but the new one is that the vaccine probably doesn't really last for longer than maybe like around 6 months or so. The effectiveness starts dwindling, which is why they're trying to do the boosters. What I think they're attempting to do is essentially get people onto into like the first couple of vaccinations, say that that's going to protect them, and then say, oh, well, actually it's waning, so now you have to take the next booster shot, and oh wait, 6 months later, oh look, we need another booster shot, and oh, by the way, you actually have to pay for this one.
Right. Oh man, I certainly hope that doesn't happen. And I
think I don't know, I'm pretty sure that that's kind of the angle they're going with here.
It's just like, what kind of other, like, where else can you go with this in terms of, like, making arguments? Like, you want to keep that, like, 50% of the population constantly arguing for this shit. Like, as more data comes out, like, it's just going to be harder and harder for them to make that argument that, these boosters and whatnot are unnecessary. I don't know. It's more of my idealistic brain.
Yeah, we would have to see if, I don't know, I've heard that there are some claims that these might potentially weaken your immune system to future coronavirus strains. So it could unfortunately be a new class of people who will have a great chance of actually dying towards new COVID strains if they don't get these constant boosters.
The gigavaxxed.
Right, and so if this is the case, you've essentially created a slave class of people that now have to constantly buy vaccines, and especially in the United States, they can definitely like fleece you for all you have. And then, I mean, will that overwhelm could that also potentially like overwhelm the centralized stupid medical care systems that are now going to have to constantly buy up massive amounts of doses of this stupid vaccine every 6 months, that taxpayer expense?
Oh. Yeah. Were there any other studies that we missed maybe talking about?
I think those were the main ones. I mean, there's the report that we didn't go into that much, which is a very interesting, 133 doctors in the UK are actually standing up and attempting to argue that the response to COVID has been a massive mistake. I thought one of the most interesting parts of that paper was that what they argued is that even border closings were largely pointless because you can have a similar strain of the virus mutate, not necessarily simultaneously, but because they are there's similar circumstances to the conditions where they're infecting in two different locations. Let's say there's no border crossing here, they can actually similar variants can actually emerge at similar times. And so they even said that the travel restriction should be scrapped.
Wow.
Which I found very interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we should definitely link that in the
Oh yeah.
in the video for sure. I heard basically, sayings like, it sort of read like the Declaration of Independence. It was
that was Jeff Caldwell. I don't really remember what representative of where he is, but he's a cool guy I follow on Facebook. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think I've pretty much said all that I, want to say, at least as of now, with this vaccine issue. But I think this is going to be something we're talking about for a while. Unfortunately, in the years to come up. So, as new reports come out, we'll certainly be talking about this. We're trying to make this a weekly thing. So we record one day, edit, and then release it hopefully the next day. Generally, we want to release these videos on Sunday. We're actually recording on Sunday because this week's been a little crazy. But yeah, expect new content coming out next week. And we have now a condenser mic and a mixer, but unfortunately we're stuck with this episode using the phone, so hopefully the audio came out well. I'm going to try to edit this the best I can tomorrow. Should take me a few hours, but...
I would just leave it off with saying that as far as a strategy to actually combat this stuff, I would say begin organizing at local levels, attempt to, and I usually am not a particular fan of voting, but I would say at this point, vote in people who will not go along with vaccination mandates, mask mandates, any of this crap. Organize at local levels. Start stocking up on supplies. Start building up communities in your area of like-minded people. Also, hypothetically, like survivalist kind of stuff, because I think there's also going to be an economic collapse, but that's for a different episode.
Yeah, I think it should be next week's episode, actually.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. Also, just in the off chance that we go full, well, not really an off chance, I think that we can still beat them at least in this game, but they're going to come back with something stupid in another year or so if we beat them now. So in the chance that we do lose this round or the next round or so, and they go full totalitarian, you may also want to learn those skills that you can just sort of end up evading the system entirely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I'll echo what you said pretty much. Learning self-sufficiency, finding your group, having a contingency plan as well. Because I think I really actually want to talk about next week sort of the economic conditions, namely inflation, supply chain issues. Things, if you're into Austrian economics, are certainly not a surprise, especially with the amount of volume of money that's been printed in the last year and a half, especially. Again, with the stimulus, or not the stimulus, rather the infrastructure bill that passed. It's another $1.5 trillion being added to the economy with very little aggregate demand or anything like that. But anyway, before we get too far into that, this has been a great episode, and we thank you all for watching and listening, and yeah.
All right, viva la revolution.
We'll see you guys next week.